One of the most highly anticipated bikes of 2024 is finally here, the Specialized Tarmac SL8. After a couple of leaks and a no-show at the Tour de France, it has broken cover at the World Championships. We have got all of the details on the new bike, and I was also lucky enough to be the first person outside Specialized to ride the bike in the UK. So I am going to share all of my first ride thoughts. As is pretty well known, the Tarmac is Specialized do-it-all road race bike. However, this version of the bike could actually be seen as somewhat of a Frankenstein's monster. When the Americans started development of this bike, they took the carbon layup strategy as found in the super lightweight ethos, and then put that into the shape of the SL8. But even the shape itself has somewhat of an ethos vibe. If you draw a line across the bike like this, then you're left with a split which is very ethosy at the rear and then very next-gen Tarmac at the front. It's really obvious on the down tube, as the lower half is more circular and thinner compared to the upper half, which swells out and becomes more ovalized. The seat stays compared to the SL7 have also slimmed right down, and again, are just more circular. The seat tube isn't hugely different from the outgoing Tarmac, but it is a little bit narrower. In fact, the seat post and the seat tube are narrower than the rear wheel itself. The big difference is found here though, at the head tube. Something which has more in common with the TT going Shiv than any of the brand's other bikes. It has become deeper, but it's been achieved by adding a cover onto the front of the head tube, rather than by increasing the fairing at the rear of the head tube. Specialized says that it has done this so that a narrower and pointier front end can be achieved, which is claimed to be far more aerodynamic. The silhouette of the bike isn't actually a million miles away from the SL7, it just looks a little bit more refined. The tubes at the rear of the bike have slimmed down, and the ones at the front have either stayed the same or just swelled up a little bit. Some may think it looks a little bit unbalanced, and to be honest, that was something that I was really nervous of when I first saw the leaked images. But in person, it looks rather good, and I'm just hoping that our shots of the bike actually do the bike justice. Of course, as a new road race bike from one of the world's biggest bike manufacturers, you best believe it has come with a whole bunch of numerical improvements. First off, we're just going to look at the top line figures, so strap in because these numbers are going to come thick and fast. Specialized claim the following. The SL8 is 16.6 seconds quicker than the SL7 over 40 kilometers. It's 15% lighter than the SL7, it's 6% more compliant at the saddle than the SL7, and has a 33% improvement in stiffness to weight. There is a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to try and de-jargon the claims and look a little bit closer. Let's start with that 16.6 second increase in speed over the SL7. What's really interesting is that Specialized claim that the SL8 is also faster than the last generation of the Venge. So in theory, this is the fastest ever road race bike that they have ever made. It's a hard metric to test unless you have a wind tunnel, but according to Specialized, it achieved much of this from the front end of the bike. The new UCI rules has meant that a deeper head tube shape could be used, along with that new Roval Rapide carbon cockpit, which is said to save 4 watts compared to the previous cockpit that's found on the SL7. There's one quote that really did stand out to me in the press material for the SL8, and that's the following. A deep airfoil down tube and seat tube may look aero, but due to the dirty air that they sit in, they create vanishingly small aero gains. But impact weight and ride quality significantly. The result may be slightly more aero in the wind tunnel, but slower in the real world. It seems then that Specialized is branding pure aero bikes as a bit of a sham, saying that in reality, since conditions are so variable, they aren't actually that much faster. This is a pretty big claim, and one which is hard to argue with when you don't have the data. However, the cynic in me does take comfort in the knowledge that if Specialized could sell you 2 bikes, for example, a Tarmac and a Venge, like in the old days, then they probably would. I also did a little bit more digging, and it did result in some interesting reading. When the SL7 was launched, the improvement in performance over the SL6 was claimed to be 45 seconds over 40 kilometers. And now that makes the 16.6 second improvement a little less impressive, but do bear in mind that the birth of the SL7 was also the death of the Venge, meaning that the SL7 could emerge and pave the way for the do-it-all road bike. Now, perhaps this factoid actually supports the argument that the SL8 is better viewed as maybe a SL7.5. Next up, let's talk about one of the other really big claims from the SL8. The weight. 15% lighter is quite a lot. To put hard numbers on that, the SL7 was claimed to weigh 800 grams for the frame. The SL8 is claimed to weigh 685 grams. Again, to give that even more context, the Athos frame is claimed to weigh 585 grams. Now, these numbers are based on a 56cm painted frame with no hardware attached. This over 100 gram saving is all well and good, but how does it affect the full build weights? Well, unsurprisingly, they're 100 grams lighter. The new S-Works SL8, built with a full Dura-Ace group set with 4i power meter and Roval's full suite of wheels and finishing kit, comes in at a claimed 6.6 kilos, while the SL7, built with the previous gen Roval Rapide wheels, cockpit and the previous generation of Dura-Ace, was a claimed 6.7 kilos. So, while it is a great weight for a top-end bike to be, the progression maybe isn't quite all it's cracked up to be. The only thing that does leave some intrigue to the weight is that there are some very obvious places where more weight can be dropped out of the full build. Simply dropping the inner tubes and then adopting a tubeless setup would probably save you about 100 grams. And, I mean, if you've got a lot of money and you wanted to buy a carbon THM chain set, then you're only going to compound those results. Put it this way, I think that a number of the customers for this bike will be looking at it as a project bike. I will not be surprised if we see custom builds of this bike hovering around the 6 kilo mark. But of course, frame size and paint will play a big part in this. The last couple of metrics that I threw at you were that the SL8 is claimed to be 6% more compliant at the saddle and has an improved stiffness to weight ratio of 33%. It's very hard to fact check these numbers. In reality, it's basically impossible without some incredibly expensive testing equipment. But what I can do, and have done, is ridden the bike to see what it feels like. The key takeaways are the following. First off, the stiffness is incredible. The bottom bracket feels rock solid. No matter how hard I pushed on the pedals, out the saddle, up a climb, it did not budge. It really felt like everything I was putting in, I was getting out. And I know how cliche that sounds. It also wasn't just the bottom bracket that felt stiff, but the head tube and bars completely mirrored the feeling. I was yanking on those bars like there was no tomorrow, and again, they were just so solid. Of course, the ride feel is one that you would expect to get from a road race bike. While I wasn't really looking for compliance or comfort features, the ride itself is one that just feels like it has a lot of purpose. You know what it's built to do. It wasn't jittery or unsettled, but when you went over a stone, you did kind of know about it. It's a bike that wants to go fast, but it's not really built for rough roads. One thing I would caveat my first ride experience with is that I was running on 26C tyres and I didn't have the chance to adjust the pressure. So if you did want to look for more compliance and maybe a little bit more comfort, then I would probably opt for running 28C tyres, and then of course just make sure you've really got your pressures dialed in. Of course, doing that will mean that you can increase the comfort and compliance that the bike will give you, but also you'll increase your contact patch with the road and it'll just make everything a bit more comfy. One aspect that I did pick up on, mainly on the descents, was actually the handling. It just felt a little bit more jittery than I was expecting. Perhaps it's because the bars aren't fully slammed, and personally, I think I would have loved a stem that was just about 10mm longer just to slow down the steering feel. Of course, bike fit and riding style is something that's incredibly personal, but I think it would have just been nice to have that slightly longer stem. I also can't ignore the fact that being the first person to ride this bike in the UK, also means that I don't want to be the first person to crash this bike. So I think I was potentially being a little bit more timid than usual. Speaking of bike fit, this actually feels pretty familiar because it has exactly the same geometry as the Tarmac SL7. The snappy rear end and playful characteristics are still very much present. It doesn't have the same aggression of, say, a Trek Madone because it feels far more forgiving, but it does reward those who really want to get stuck in and see what they're capable of on all types of parkour. What this bike feels like to me is a culmination of multiple component parts. You have many elements from the ethos, lots of hereditary features from the SL7, and a few genuinely new innovations which are now distinctly SL8. Do I like this bike? Absolutely. Is it still one of, if not, the best road race bike on the market? That's hard to say. Perhaps that's a too subjective a question. But after my limited time with the bike, I believe that Specialized has done it again. It has created a bike that masses of road cyclists will love, pro and amateur alike. This then brings me on to pricing, and at the time of filming, we are currently yet to have any prices confirmed to us, so we'll pop them on screen for you now. And for comparison, here are the same models of bike, but from the SL7 iteration, so that you can see what the price difference is. Of course, the SL8 isn't all about the top-end S-Works version. There are multiple builds of the bike. And again, at the time of recording, we believe that there will be two S-Works builds, a SRAM Red Axis version and a Shimano Dura-Race Di2. At the Pro level, there will be a Force Axis build and an Ultegra Di2 build, followed by the Expert models, which will be equipped with SRAM Rival Axis. Now finally, because we always get these questions in the comments, here are some of the smaller, nerdier bits of detail. First off, tyre clearance is the same as the SL7 at 32mm. The bottom bracket is still threaded. The SL8 is for electronic-only group sets. If you buy a frame set, it does not come with the Roval Rapide bars. You can remove the front derailleur hanger and then fit a cover for a really clean 1x setup if that's your thing. The SL8 is compatible with the SL7 stem, so if you have a normal 31.8mm handlebar that you want to use with this bike, then that is possible. In fact, the non-S-Works builds of the Tarmac will actually ship with the SL7 stem fitted rather than the Roval Rapide cockpit. And lastly, in terms of weight difference between the S-Works 12R carbon frame to the Pro level 10R carbon frame is about an extra 100 grams. So there we have it, that is the brand new Specialized Tarmac SL8. Let me know your thoughts on this bike down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, then please do drop it a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and I will see you again very soon.